In last lecture, I had discussed about poisoning as general. What are the common poisons? What is the situation in India? How we can manage the poison? Last time we discussed patient may not be in a position to give history, so we have to depend on some signs and symptoms and some relative or accompanying person for a proper history. There are some specific signs and symptoms to diagnose the which poison probably patient has consumed. Then we should know toxidromes, the special characteristic signs and symptoms related to the poison. How to manage this patient? Remember, whenever you start assessing the patient, first assess that whether patient is in cardiac arrest or patient is near arrest. I'll start with A, B, C, D, that is airway, breathing, circulation. Then start oxygen, IV, monitor, and then stabilize the patient first. Then comes with the decontamination. Remove the poison either by cleaning the skin, putting an ice tube, giving gastric lavage, and use specific antidotes. This is the way you can manage the poison. Today I am going to talk to you about some insecticidal poisons and some animal bites. Most common about insecticidal poison is organophosphorus poison. Organophosphorus poison is principally used as an insecticidal in agriculture area. Acute poisoning secondary to organophosphorus occurs following ingestion, mostly with suicidal intent, or less commonly following accidental exposure during the spray. Organophosphate inhibits plasma cholinesterase from plasma and acetylcholinesterase from the RBCs. This inhibition of acetylcholinesterase leads to accumulation of acetylcholine throughout the autonomic and somatic nervous system as well as the brain, resulting in overstimulation of muscarinic and nicotinic receptor. If you see, acetylcholinesterase is a neurotransmitter. This enzyme that degrades the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, actually when the signal is transferred from presynaptic to postsynaptic notch, the acetylcholine is secreted, then it is received by acetylcholine receptor and signal is transmitted. What acetylcholinesterase does, it stops the signaling process by blocking this acetylcholine release. And organophosphate poison actually acts on acetylcholinesterase and inhibits their secretion, because of which overstimulation of acetylcholine occurs, which leads to a very specific clinical features of organophosphorus poisoning. The features, clinical features, because of overstimulation of muscarinic acetylcholine receptor causes overstimulation of parasympathetic system. So it is presented with bronchospasm, bronchorrhea, so a lot of secretion from the respiratory tract, constriction of the pupil, that is meiosis, lacrimation, excess urination, diarrhea, hypotension, bradycardia, vomiting and salivation. So these are the features secondary to overstimulation of muscarinic acetylcholine receptor in parasympathetic system. Then there are some features which are occurring because of overstimulation of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the sympathetic system. They cause tachycardia, mydriasis, hypertension and sweating. Features due to overstimulation of nicotinic and muscarinic acetylcholine receptor in the central nervous system causes convulsions, which is very common with organophosphorus poisoning. Agitations, patients is irritable, sometimes they are comatose and they go in respiratory failure because of action of this acetylcholine over the central nervous system. Then there are some features due to overstimulation of nicotinic acetylcholine receptor in neuromuscular junction, which causes muscle weakness, paraplegia, and fasciculations. So these are the different clinical features and presentations of patients with organophosphorus poisoning. To remember these clinical features, there are many mnemonics are suggested. One is sludge, SLUDGE. Sludge means salivation, lacrimation, urinary incontinence. D for diarrhea and diaphoresis. G for GI upset and emesis. Again, you can have another mnemonic like dumbbells. Dumbbells stands for D for diaphoresis, diarrhea, G for urination, increased urination, M for meiosis, B for bradycardia, bronchospasm, E for excess lacrimation and excess salivation. So these are the shortly you can remember clinical features of organophosphorus poisoning. So there are three well-defined syndromes occur because of organophosphorus. One is cholinergic crisis, then intermediate syndrome, and delayed polyneuropathy. The acute cholinergic crisis present with musculotic effects which causes meiosis, bronchoruria, bronchospasm, salivation, lacrimation, abdominal pain, and bradycardia. Nicotinic effects, fasciculation, hyperreflexia, flaccid muscle weakness with reduced tendon reflexes, and central nervous system causes headache, dizziness, confusion, drowsiness, coma, fits, and depression of respiratory center. So these are the acute cholinergic syndrome where you can revert muscular effect with the atropine, you can reverse nicotinic effect with palidostickmin, or oximes, and for central nervous system effect and convergence you need anticonvergent, diazepam, oxygen, and ventilator support. What is the intermediate syndrome? It occurs between cholinergic syndrome and late onset polyneuropathy. So it is intermediate. It occurs usually after 12 hours to 96 hours after exposure to poison. Muscle weakness in ocular, neck, bulbar muscles, proximal limbs, and respiratory muscles are very common with occasional dystonic posturing. The mortality due to respiratory depression as a result of muscle paralysis occurs during this syndrome. Then delayed neuropathy do not produce significant cholinergic crisis, leads to pure motor axonal neuropathy with wrist and foot drop from 7 to 20 days of after exposure. So immediately on admission, patient gets acute cholinergic crisis where patient gets muscarinic, nicotinic, and some central nervous system features. Acute crisis occurs in first few hours of ingestion of the poison. After 12 hours, if patient still shows signs, it goes in intermediate syndrome, and after 7 days, if still patient got some signs of neuropathy, it is called as delayed neuropathy. So usually this patient die because of the respiratory failure, which may be central, or because of the muscle weakness. This is the most common cause of death. But with advancement of the critical care medicine, availability of ventilators, and trained people, patient dying because of the respiratory failure has gone down drastically, and I would say rather patient should not die of organophosphorus poisoning because of the muscle weakness or respiratory failure. So another important cause of death is fetal cardiac arrhythmias. If patient gets a cardiac arrhythmias, pulmonary edema, and patient may die. So respiratory failure and cardiac arrhythmias is the two common cause by which patient may succumb second to this poison. And remember, sometimes cholinergic crisis may last for 24 to 72 hours. How to manage organophosphorus poisoning? So, according to the patient's condition, you have to decide whether patient requires admission and whether he requires admission in the intensive care unit. So, most of the patient initially it is better to admit in critical care department or intensive care units from the casualty or emergency department. Initially, stabilize the patient. So again start with A, B, C, D. So look up at airway, breathing, circulation, and if required, assist airway by putting a endotracheal tube, assist ventilation, give IV fluids, start supports if patient's blood pressure is low. So initial stabilization is very, very important and crucial for saving the life of the patient. Then reduction of the exposure. So take out all the clothes, wash the patient with soap and water, put a rice tube, take out the poison. If you do it early, probably long-term effects of this poison can be prevented. Then third is administration of specific antidote. As I told you, atropine and pyridoxine are two antidotes available to reverse the muscarinic and nicotinic effects. And then supportive care, which includes intravenous fluids, nutrition, vitamins, and some, if the patient develops an infection and sepsis, the treatment of that particular complication we have to consider. So initial stabilization, as I told you, clear the airway, adequate ventilation and oxygenation, then support the circulation. How to decontaminate the poison? Dermal spills can be decontaminated by washing pesticide spills from the patient with soap and water. Remove and discard the cloths, shoes, or any other material made from the leather. Then gastric lavage is very important. Gastric lavage is very important. Consider for when patient presents to you with 1 to 2 hours after ingestion of the poison, when the airway is protected. So when you put a rice tube and try to give a gastric lavage, there is a high chance that patient may aspirate the vomitus and may cause more damage. So it is better to take control of the airway first and then give gastric lavage. A single aspiration of gastric content may be useful, but remember again, you have to do it as early as possible. Then you can also use activated charcoal. 50 grams may be given orally or with nasogastric tube to the patient who are cooperative and intubated, particularly if they are admitted within 1 or 2 hours of the ingestion of toxicity. So after initial stabilization, decontamination is very important. So there is initial stabilization, the decontamination of the poison, and then antidote use for treatment of wound poisoning. So there are two specific antidotes are available for organophosphorus poisoning. One is atropine. It reverses the muscarinic effects of the poison, and oxide, which reactivates the acetylcholinesterase and reverses the nicotinic features. Atropine, the initial dose is 0.5 to 2 milligram IV. Give every after 5 to 10 minutes until you get the signs of atropinization. Or you can also give atropine by continuous infusion at a rate of 0.02 to 0.08 milligram per kg per hour with additional 1 to 5 milligram bolus dose till you get the signs of atropinization. Patient may require a huge amount of atropine in initial hours. Almost 40 to 1500 milligram per day may be required by the patient depending on the severity of the consumption. The atropine may be required for initial 5 to 7 days. And you have to keep a watch on the over-atropinization or atropine side effects when patient is showing signs of atropinization. So at that time, you have to cut down the dose of atropine. What are the endpoints for atropine therapy? See, patient gets bronchorrhea and increased salivation because of its muscarinic effects. When patient chest becomes clear on auscultation, heart rate increases more than 80 because bradycardia is again a feature of organophosphorus poisoning. Then pupils, which are pinpoint meiosis, is now become a normal size pupils or dilated pupils, dry skin or axilla, and improvement of blood pressure more than 80 millimeter of systolic. These are the targets endpoints of the atropine therapy. Remember, dilated pupil is not a reliable sign of initial atropinization or endpoint of atropine therapy. So you have to look for heart rate, secretions, and blood pressure in addition to the pupillary size. Then pallidoxime, an oxime that reacts with the phosphorylated cholinesterase. It causes effect from the skeletal neurovascular junction, counteracts the weakness, fasciculation, and respiratory depression. It has to be administered within 48 hours of poison injection. The dose is usually IV 1 to 2 grams in 100 ml of normal saline over 30 minutes. Remember, you should not exceed the dose more than 200 per minute and repeat after 1 hour if muscle weakness is persistent, and then after 8 to 12 hours if cholinergic signs recurs even after giving the oximes. In severe cases, you can even consider infusion of 500 milligram per hour, maximum around 12 grams in first 24 hours, palidoxime in patient of organophosphorus poisoning. Usually start these oximes after maximal atropination, so it will work better. So after this insecticidal poison, organophosphorus poison, we'll learn something about the corrosive poisoning. Alkaline or acidic agents causes tissue destruction when come in contact with mucous membrane. So that's why it is called as corrosive poison. Mostly it is accidental in children and sometimes suicidal in adults. What are the acids and alkalis which causes corrosive effects or poisoning in the patient? There are toilet cleansers like hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid, anti-rust components like hydrochloric acid or oxalic acid, soldering fluxes, hydrochloric acid, automobile battery fluid, that is sulfuric acid, or slate cleaner, that is hydrochloric acid. There are acid corrosive poisons. Alkaline corrosives are drain cleaners like sodium hypochlorite, surface cleaner like ammonia or phosphate, laundry or dishwashers like phosphate or carbonates, cleanitest tablets like sodium hypochlorite, or industrial strength bleach. This can cause alkaline corrosive poisons. What are the clinical presentations? In acute phase, patient gets acute symptoms like pain, a difficulty in swallowing, that is dysphagia, or hematemesis. Laryngeal edema causes hoarseness of voice, stridor, patient not able to talk or produce voice properly. Aspiration causes chemical bronchitis and patient may have respiratory distress. Ingestion of the poison may cause gastric perforation or esophageal perforation. Patient may go in septic shock and may die because of this complication. In subacute phase, a transient decrease in above mentioned symptoms. Then, in the late phase, patient may have esophageal stricture, which causes dysphagia, gastric stenosis, causing gastric outlet obstruction. So, some acute presentation, then some subacute problems, and then late problems like esophageal stricture or gastric stenosis occurs because of the corrosive poison. How to manage this patient? In acute presentation, please don't try to put a rice tube in patients with corrosive poison, because you may produce more harm, more injury to the tissue or mucous membrane, and you may perforate the stomach or esophagus. So no rice tube insertion. Keep patient NBM, give intravenous fluids, maintain the airway, start supportive care. Then you have to rule out complications like perforation peritonitis. For that, you will have to do an X-ray chest or abdomen, maybe a contrast radiogram or a CT scan and upper endoscopy when patient is stabilized. Antibiotics are required when patient is having signs of infection. Steroids might help to reduce the laryngeal edema, and patients in a late stage may require a surgical intervention where patient has got perforation of esophagus or stomach, or massive upper GI bleed, or full thickness burn of esophageal stomach, or outlet obstruction. In chronic phase or late sequelae like esophageal and or gastric stricture, you can assess and diagnose with barium study the site of stricture, its extent and its nature. Then endoscopically you can dilate the stricture or you can repair it surgically by antrectomy or partial gastrectomy. So this is about the corrosive poisons. Then we'll rapidly go through the very important topic, that is snake bites. A fatal bites can occur because of the snakes, scorpion bites, bee sting bite, rarely because of the mosquito bite and dog bite. Snake bite is a medical emergency. It results in the death or chronic disability of the thousands of the active young people. If you see the global burden, almost 54 lakh snakes bite occur with 2,50,000 innovation and around 1,25,000 fatalities annually in the world. So it's a very high incidence of snake bite in overall world. Most snake bites and fatalities occur in Asia, Southern and Saharan Africa, with India reporting the highest mortality due to snake bite. And for that, we need to learn snake bite more carefully and in more detail. If you look at the Maharashtra statistics, the incidence is 70 bites per lakh population, and the mortality is still around 2.5% per lakh population per year. So it's a significant mortality and morbidity secondary to snake bite in our country. The common poisonous snakes in India, the most poisonous and medically important species of India are distributed widely throughout the country, which include cobra, common krait, Russell's viper, and saw-scale viper. The hum-node pit viper is a newly identified viper bite, which is very common, found in Kerala state and responsible for almost 10% venomous bite. So this is newly added to these 4 poisonous snakes. In human, snake bite usually inject venom subcutaneously or intramuscularly, with average dry weight of the venom injected at the strike is approximately 60 milligram in Indian cobra, 13 milligram in a saw-scale viper, or 63 milligram in Russell's viper respectively. So the effects of poison depends on the amount of venom injected by snake bite. So these 4 snakes, cobra, krait, viper, and saw-scale viper, is called as Big 4 in India. What are the host and environmental factors which cause a snake bite? The snake bite may be termed as an occupational disease, as farmers, plantation workers, herdsmen, hunters, or workers on development sites are mostly affected. So people who are working at these places are likely to have snake bite. So it can be an occupational hazard or occupational disease. Snake bite shows the classical seasonal variation, being it's more common in the summers and the rainy seasons. Males are bitten almost twice as compared to the female, because these all occupations is dominantly done by the male people in India. The majority of the bites begin in the lower extremity, because a lot of people are still walking barefoot in the farms and in the jungles. Fortunately, 50% of the bites by venomous snake bites are dry bites, so that they don't inject the venoms or inject negligible venom, and patient may not die because of these dry bites. Snake venom. The normal function of the snake venom is to immobilize the prey and help to digestion of the snakes. So basically, for their food, the venom is secreted. The toxic component of snake venom can be classified into 4 broad categories. It includes enzymes, polypeptides, glycoprotein, and compound of the low molecular weight. Compound of low molecular weight. They can also classify as protein and non-protein, where protein is around 90-95% and non-protein component is around 5-10%. How to manage snake bite? This is very, very important, because as I told you, this is mostly occur in rural part of the country. So even people or lay people should know how to do a first aid of these patients. most of the time it has been observed that people in the society have a lot of misbeliefs about the treatment, and they continue some traditional harmful treatment to the patients with a snake bite. So what is important? Avoid any this such traditional unscientific treatment. Reassure the patient, as most of the snakes are non-poisonous. Patient may have symptoms because of the severe stress and anxiety. So reassurance is very important. Application of pressure pad over the bite wound. Immobilization of the bitten limb is very important. And transporting the patient to the place where he can receive the medical care without delay is the principle of the treatment. To remember this first aid, you can remember carry no right. What is meant by carry no right? Carry. Do not allow victim to walk even for a short distance. So if patients start walking, then poison is absorbed rapidly and circulated throughout the body. So immobilization is the principle. So do not allow victim to even walk for short distance. Just carry him to hospital or him away from the bite and immobilize him. Then no tourniquet, no electrotherapy, no cutting of the wound, and no pressure immobilization. Okay? And right for reassurance, immobilization, get to the hospital immediately and tell your doctor what are your problems, what symptoms you are having. So carry no right. This no is very important. This has been very commonly followed in the rural part of the country. Tying the tourniquets, cutting the wound. Basically, this all and tourniquet may even cause ischemia of the limb if you don't allow the circulation to occur in the limb. So no to tourniquet, no to electrotherapy, no to cutting, and no to very severe pressure immobilization. And carry this patient to the hospital as early as possible. This is the way you should immobilize the limb, put the dressing, and then support. Immobilize with a wooden stick. Or if it is a lower limb, you can do like this, or upper limb, keep it like this. So immobilize the limb properly. Or this is pressure pad immobilization or pressure bandage immobilization. This is the way you should do the first aid to immobilize the limb, and then ship this patient to the hospital. Diagnosis of snake bite is usually obvious with the history, but basically which poison has caused the bite, that depends on the identification of bite mark. Or if it's not possible, then the description which relatives or patient can give to you, accordingly you can decide whether it is a cobra, it is a viper, it is a saw-scale viper, or it is a crate. Sometimes patients bring the snake directly by killing the snake in front of you, or they may take the mobile phone images and you can diagnose which type of poison has caused the bite. Then you can diagnose the snake bite on the clinical syndrome of the innovation. If history is not available, you can diagnose which type of snake has caused the signs of poisoning, depending on the few simple things. So look at the bite mark and see the local area. If there is a mark swelling, then look for neurotoxic signs, like patient is not able to breathe, not able to lift up the lids, or patient is drowsy, his muscle weakness. So if there are neurotoxic signs. If patient has neurotoxic signs, then look for a clotting, blood clotting, spontaneous bleeding at the site of the bite. If there are neurotoxic signs with no bleeding at the site or no clotting abnormality, and there is early blistering or necrosis, it is a cobra bite. So cobra bite usually causes neurotoxic signs. If patient has got neurotoxic signs with a non-clotting blood, with a bleeding at the site, and patient has got acute renal failure, patient has got Russell's viper bite. So Russell's viper causes neurotoxic signs as well as renal failure as well as coagulopathy. If there is a marked swelling and non-clotting of blood. There is a spontaneous bleeding at the site, and neurological signs are absent. Renal failure is present. Then there is a chance of hump nose viper bite or a saw. And if there is no renal failure, it is saw scale viper bite. Remember, there are no local swelling, but neurotoxic signs are present. Bitten on the hand when particularly sleeping on the floor in the house, then it is crate bite. So crates are known for not having any local mark or local swelling. If there is no local swelling, but neurotoxic signs are present, and that bite will occur in the sea, it is sea snake bite. So this is a syndromic approach to diagnose which type of venomation patient has caused by the which type of snake. The composition and antigenicity of snake venom varies greatly between the venom species. Then snake maturity, seasonality between both sexes and throughout the geographical range. Again, these are the four common pictures of common poisonous snakes. Fatality due to snake bite is due to wide species variation, shortage of anti-snake venom, poor compliance with the treatment protocol, lack of public education, and clear policy to deal with the problem. Clinical effects: puncture marks. Sometimes patient with only puncture marks and no clear history. Local pain and swelling at the bite site. Local signs as well as systemic signs of innovation. Signs of extreme anxiety, or patient is present with effects of first aid because of the tight tourniquets or cutting of the skin and bleeding and other pre-hospital treatment. So patient is present with any of the clinical features like this. So again, this is a syndromic approach, which I already told you. If you see, as a summary, local pain or tissue damage doesn't occur in the crate bite. Otherwise, all cobra, viper, saw-scale viper, hammer, local pain and swelling occurs. So neurological signs like ptosis and difficulty in breathing, muscle weakness occurs in cobra and crate bites. Hemostatic abnormality or coagulopathy occurs in viper and saw-scale viper, Russell viper, hump-nose viper bites. Renal failure occurs in Russell's viper and hump-nose viper. Response to neosignin is very common and very obvious with cobra bite, but not in Russell's viper or saw-scale or hump-nose viper bite. Response to anti-snake venom occurs in almost all bites except hump-nose viper bite. There are no obvious laboratory tests to diagnose the venomation. Only one test where lab facilities are not available, particularly in the rural part of the country. You can do 20 minutes whole blood clotting test, where you can put blood in the tube and look whether it is clotted or not for 20 minutes. ELISA assay is available, but that is only of academic purposes. It's very costly and available only in very rare centers. And you have to do a non-specific test to see the effects of the poison, like hemogram, kidney function test, prothrombin time, partial prothrombin time, CPK, fibrinogen levels, FDP level, blood gas, electrolytes, urine, and X-ray test, and so on. 20 minutes whole blood clotting test is, as I told you, can be done at anywhere at the bedside. Place few ml of freshly sampled venous blood in a small glass vessel. Leave undisturbed for 20 minutes at ambient temperature. Keep the vessel once. If blood is still liquid, it is unclotted and runs out, the patient has got hypophyrogenemia or incoagulable blood as a result of venom-induced consumption coagulopathy. In India, incoagulable blood is a diagnosis of viper bite and rules out elapsed bite. The vessel must of glass only. you don't do this test in a plastic containers. How to treat snake bite? Anti-venom, anti-snake venom is a life-saving. WHO recognized it as an essential medicine and is the only effective antidote available for innovation. Anti-snake venom is only definitive treatment for snake bite. It acts by neutralizing circulating venom in the blood in the tissues. So it has to be used as early as possible. When the venom is bound to the protein, it may not be reversed with the anti-snake venom. In Indian anti-venom manufacturers, they manufacture polyvalent anti-snake venom from the horses using venom of 4 important snake bites in India. It may be insufficient of its own to save the patient life. So you may have to have a supportive care, ventilator care, ICU management, maintaining of blood pressure, maintenance of coagulopathy, treatment of renal failure in addition to the anti-snake venom. What are the indications of anti-snake venom therapy? When patient has got early features of systemic innovation like hemostatic abnormalities, spontaneous systemic bleeding, or 20 minutes whole blood clotting test is positive, or patient with neurotoxic signs like ptosis, external ophthalmoplegia, dysphagia, and paralysis, or patient has got some cardiovascular effects like shock or cardiac arrhythmia. You can use anti-snake venom when there is a local signs of innovation, local swelling involving more than half of the limb, bitten limb, is an indication of anti-snake venom. Or the local swelling which is rapidly increasing and development of enlarged tender lymph nodes on drainage limb side is another indication of ASV. Remember, ASV is a very important medication. It is a scarce, costly commodity, so should not be used indiscriminately. And it is a costly drug. And remember, it has got high chances of reactions. So use when only it is indicated. And remember, you have to able to manage the anaphylactic reactions, which are very common with ASV. How much and how long ASV should be given is a matter of controversy. The Indian National Snake Bite Protocol and a previous edition of WHO guidelines recommend immediate administration of 5 vials, and there is a recent concern that almost 4 to 6 vials is to be given for most of the snake bite. 10 vials for patient with other species, for 5 to 6 vials for Echis candidatus bites, and for 10 vials for other bites. Repeated dosing if patient fails to improve, and maximum 20 vials can be given to this patient. Roughly, if patient has got great bite or signs of great, 100 ml is recommended dose. If patient has got Russell's viper, again 100 ml is the recommended dose. Soft scale viper 50 ml and cobras require 50 ml. How to assess the response to this anti-snake venom injection? In general, patient feels better after giving this anti-snake venom, subject to feeling of well-being. Bleeding stops within 15 to 30 minutes. Coagulation reverses between 3 to 6 hours. Shock, if patient is in shock, blood pressure started improving within 30 to 60 minutes. If patient has got arrhythmias, they also get resolved within next 30 to 60 minutes. Neurotoxic signs like post-synaptic type occurs in cobra bites may begin to improve as early as within 30 minutes. Or pre-synaptic toxin like threads and snake bite will not respond to anti-snake venom this way. The active hemolysis and rhabdomyolysis is serious within few hours, and urine color may return to normal in few hours. The criteria for repeating the initial dose of antivenom: if patient has got persistent or recurrence of blood coagulation abnormality after 6 hours, or patient has got bleeding after 1 to 2 hours, you can think of repeating the dose of anti-snake venom. In patients who continue to bleed briskly, the dose of antivenom should be repeated within 1 to 2 hours. And deteriorating neurotoxic and cardiovascular signs, after 1 hour of giving this antivenom, you can think of giving a repeat dose of antihistamine. How long after bite can antivenom be expected to be effective? Antivenom treatment should be given as soon as it is indicated and as early as possible. In case of hemostatic abnormalities, ASP may reverse symptoms within 2 to 3 weeks. So continue as long as evidence of coagulopathy persists. So in patients with hematological abnormalities, patients with coagulopathy, ASP dose may be slightly prolonged as compared with neurotoxic bites. The reactions secondary to anti-snake venom is very common. The overall incidence is from 5 to 50%. 10 to 15% times it is a moderate to severe. Patient may get anaphylactic reactions, and the observation and immediate treatment with adrenaline is very important in such patients. Then few lines about the scorpion sting bite. Indian red scorpion is the most lethal among all poisonous species. A scorpion is a nocturnal in habitat, and people walking barefoot become their victim. Farmers are more prone during the month of April to June and September to October. Sting during these months is more venomous. Its innovation is a fatal without timely and appropriate treatment. The clinical manifestations of scorpion bite: early prebiotic symptoms are vomiting, profuse sweating, priapism, cold extremities, and mild pain. Locally, severe excruciating pain is a very common and important clinical manifestation. It radiates along with the corresponding dermatomes, local edema, urticaria, fasciculation, muscle spasm. Transient bradycardia and hypotension or raised blood pressure can occur because of the severe pain. And if you tap at the site of bite, patient may even cry, or patient may avoid tapping. Tapping sign is very important sign where patient may say, "You don't tap." Then systemic signs like autonomic storm. Initially, parasympathetic stimulation causes vomiting, diarrhea, salivation, priapism, mydriasis, bradycardia, hypotension, and ventricular premature bleeds. As sympathetic stimulation causes soft eyes, puffy and anxious faces, oliguric crisis, chest discomfort, paresthesia, and cold extremities. Hypertension and pulmonary edema can occur because of the scorpion bite. Intervention required to manage this patient is a complete blood count, CPK-MB, ECG, and echocardiography. Management: no scorpion sting may be taken as a benign unless observed for 24 hours. Correction of hypovolemia is very important. The local innovation signs, and to reduce the pain, use of ice packs, local anesthesia, NSAIDs or benzodiazepines. Systemic signs is to treat it with IV pills and correction of electro abnormalities. Prazosin is a poor man's scorpion antivenom. It is a pharmacological and physiological antidote. It reduces preload, left ventricular impedance, reverses metabolic syndrome evoked due to excessive catecholamine release. It also inhibits sympathetic overflow in the central nervous system. The dose is 250 to 500 microgram per kg in children and 500 to 1000 microgram per kg in adults. Repeat after every 3 hours till clinical improvement or dry and cold extremities persist. With advent of prazosin, casualties reduced to less than 1%. The scorpion antivenom is also available for clinical use. Scorpion antivenom is more effective in victim, is brought in a stage of acetylcholine excess, that is the early stage of scorpion bite. Dose is 30 ml to 100 ml. It's expensive, almost causes 15,000 rupees, 1,500 rupees per vial, and always in short supply, so it's difficult to get this anti-scorpion venom. A prazosin along with scorpion antivenom, hastens the recovery and shortens the hospital and ICU stay. Thank you. So today we discuss about the organophosphorus poisoning, common snake bite and scorpion bite.